were the Scots doing in the American Revolution? Now, I already hear many people don't really understand this part in history because apparently not that many people understand that the Scots did fight in the American Revolution. Thing is, though, many people don't realize is which side did they fight for. Well, I get many stories that say that they fought primarily for this side or that side. Well, you're somewhat right if you state that. But in truth, they fought for both sides, depending on the clan. Now, if you don't know Scottish system and history, if we actually take a look at historical records, Scotland was incredibly divided during the time in history. And what makes it worse is the fact that Scotland itself was conquered. Well, I want to say conquered, but in truth, it was not entirely what we might understand as conquered. In fact, if we take a look at history books, Scotland was technically, well, overpowered by the British government, and in such, it was technically already conquered during the 1707, but with the Jacobite uprising that happened in the 1745, for example, this was technically the end of the, well, Scottish system, and in such, the clan system entirely was destroyed. Now, we have to understand is that when Scotland, well, was forced into this type of, well, agreement, Scottish clans actually did swear an allegiance back to England. These would be many of the clans that fought for the Jacobites. And in such, I will leave a link down below if any of y'all are interested in which clans fought for the Jacobites. But in such, the clans that did, the major clans that did, especially that, well, went back to the English and pretty much, well, swore allegiance to them, never to fight back against them again. These major clans would be the clan of Campbells, MacDonalds, and as well Macleans, Grant, and Mackenzies, as well Sutherlands, Glades, and as well MacGregors, who of which actually swore allegiance back to the English after the Battle of Culloden. However, Clan Campbell was technically divided during that time, and as such, the clans that were already on the side of the English at the time, which would be Clan Keith, Douglas, Kennedy, and Jordan. However, there are many, some say, that of which there are mixed clans that actually fought for the, well, Jacobites, which there actually were, especially in the Scottish Highlands. Now, one thing I had to put this out here, the reason I'm talking about the Battle of Culloden especially, that happened in April 16th of 1746, is because of the fact that we have to understand is this is what led to many of them fighting in the American Revolution. And in such, many clans that actually, well, or clansmen that survived after the Battle of Culloden, especially after the massacre, and as well, especially what happened after the Battle of Culloden, the major killing of which happened throughout the Scottish Highlands. This massacre ended up causing major clans hate the English, especially with the fact that the butcher had actually ordered a massive killing of many innocent civilians miles away from the battle. This would actually include many men, women, and even children. However, it's even stated that the homes were destroyed and ravaged, burned, their cattle stolen, and as well their livestock taken away. And as well, what made it worse is that many women were also raped by the English soldiers. This kind of made it very hard to understand for history books due to the fact many people don't really look this part up in history because of the fact they don't actually believe that anything like this existed. Well, tell that to the Scots, in which this is why many Scots really hate the English, especially. But the many clans that actually fought for the English later on in history were known as traitors to the Scottish Highlands and Midlands. In fact, many of the Scots that actually fought for the English, especially before the Battle of Culloden, were mostly lowlanders, especially the Campbells, who were technically a mix up between Highland, Midland, and Lowland, depending on their area. And in such, well, most of them, as I stated, the lowlands of Scotland are pretty much the area of, well, Britain, or pretty much northern England, the border area, and as well up to Stirling Castle. And as such, anywhere beyond that will be the Midlands until we reach Loch Ness, and as well, further on beyond that, well, that would be the Scottish Highlands. Now, we do have to understand, though, if we take a look at this image, this is how most people, especially in the Scotland itself, the Scots, believe this idealism of their entire boundary system between the lowlands and highlands, which, if you look at that like that, however, if you were to go back in the 1800s or 17 or 1600s, it'd be a lot different, as I stated. In fact, the Loch Ness, in fact, the two lochs, especially Loch Ness, actually divided Scotland into Highlands, in which these are known as the true Highlanders, being, well, Sutherland, Clangun, and so on, anywhere up in that region. And then there are the Islanders, which are the most famous, MacLeods, which are known as Islanders especially, not Highlanders. Which, yeah, a lot of times people get those two confused. Then there is actually the Lowlands of Scotland, or the Midlands of Scotland, which are between Loch Ness and Stirling Castle, which is probably the biggest region. Then there are the Lowlanders, which are, well, south of Stirling Castle. That would be the viewing point at that time in history. However, over time it started to evolve, but that's something for another time. Now, one thing we do have to understand is why did the, well, Scots actually, change sides? Well, in order to save their people. Problem is, it was a little too late after that. And as well, many Scots actually were stated to have fled to the Americas in order to find a better life, seeing as though they were technically treated as second-class citizens in their own homeland. We can easily see this not going out so well for many Scots. Now, many people might ask me, Templar, why did the English do this? For some big reason. Well, that's the thing. Most people don't really understand on this idea. In fact, if you were a military army, you want to get rid of any form of rebellions, this is technically the best way. Problem is, it also caused somewhat rebellions, and we can easily see this in many American patriots, who were Scottish. One of the most famous would be John Paul Jones, as any all have recently seen. I will leave a link down below in the description, and as well one of my older videos being Alex McGregor, or Alexander McGregor as he was also known, who of which actually was a true Jacobite to the very end. Now, in truth, it's actually stated that many of the Scots that fought in the American Revolution, especially for the colonies and as well for the Brits, had different, well, designed groups. For example, the ones that fought with the British Army, they were known as the Black Watch. The Black Watch were nicknamed the Black Watch because of their tartan, the Black Watch tartan, which most of the entirety of the Scottish army in the English military were pretty much of the Lowlands and Midlanders. However, it is stated, though, that the major divisions that were seen in the American Revolution by the Scottish Army would be of the 71st and as well the 78th Highland Foot, meaning Highland Infantry. And as such, these guys were incredibly horrifying on the battlefield. In fact, it's actually stated that over pretty much a few hundred handfuls of American foot soldiers have actually seen the gruesome reality of these guys charging in mid-light of firing a brown bess musket, which I did explain in a previous video, which I will leave in the link in the description. But we do have to understand, though, the Scots that were actually doing this was a mix of a Highland charge with a firing type formation. These guys were known to have worn the Scottish kilt and as well the red coat. However, unlike the British soldier, which wore regular, which looks like this, the Scottish Highland foot soldier, they would have worn a type of Glengarry cap, or Jacobite cap, as it was also known, which had a slanted type look, which I was once part of a Highland group here in San Antonio, and our band major's wife stated that she hated seeing her husband in it because it made her remind him, she stated he looked like Donald Duck. So, I don't know, I don't see that especially, but yeah, because that was a naval sea cap. This is a little different because it's a Highland cap, as it's also been known as. However, many of us Scots call it a Jacobite cap because that was the major headwear that was used by the Jacobites. However, the English that actually adopted this type of look especially gave it to the British Regiment of the said Scottish Highland Guards, of which many Highland divisions were a little different. Now, Highland divisions in Scotland were what you might call division areas. This would be pretty much after the Battle of Culloden, or Massacre at Culloden, whatever you want to pronounce it as. And it stated the reason that the divisions were placed up there was to keep control of Scotland, in order to make sure that a conflict like this would never happen again. Problem is, it would happen in the Americas, many of which with, well, many of those who had survived, or as which trying to flee Scotland in order to find a better life. Now, I do want to put this out here. The Scots that would have actually pretty much, well, fought for the English in Scotland especially, the Highland regiments would actually, well, wear the governmental colors of the red, the red, as we say, trouser or tunic. In such, the red coat system, and as such, they would also wear the red type Glengarry cap, or blackgarry, as it was also known as, and instead of a feather, which this would represent that you're a Jacobite, which I don't know if anyone else knows this, but the Scots would have actually, during the Battle of Culloden, would have worn a white feather in order to support Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Stuarts. And in such, any of those who would have fought for the English and wear these type of Glengarry caps, they were stated to have worn a red type of feather. In other words, to support King George. And you gotta admit, it's kind of a easy way to tell the difference between a loyalist and a Jacobite. But that's a major difference. However, after the conflict in this type of system, the divisions in history, such as Clan Davidson, as it's also known as the Davidson Tartan, which my clan had to be part of. Now, it is stated, though, that many clans, such as Sutherland and as well as even MacDonald's, Campbell's, and such, they were kind of different. Now, it's actually stated that Campbell's were the major traitors in the Highlands, who of which actually went as far as to go as far as, how should I put this, make themselves more loyal to the English crown. And as such, they would have actually been brutally brutal to many Scottish Highlanders, who of which they governed. Now, if now you all understand, after the clan system of the war, the clan system was destroyed, and many clans were, well, now, especially the major clans in history, such as Campbell's, would actually take governorship over other smaller clans in order to keep track of them. This could also be seen with Clan Mackenzie, MacGregor, MacDonald's, and so on. And as such, they would have their tartans be viewed as the military tartan of the entire area. Now, it is stated, though, because of this, it would actually make a little bit easier to tell the difference. For example, this would be Campbell's division, and each clan from, say, a neighboring clan near the clan system, such as like this clan that's next to Clan Campbell, would be part of the clan military system. Meaning you would see Campbell's tartan throughout many other clans, or as well Mackenzie's tartan throughout other clans, or Sutherland tartans out from other clans. So you can see how that went. However, the system of tartan looked like this instead of the Highland Jacobite design, which I rather prefer a little more, but you get to understand. Now, this dress tartan would have actually still been used by the Scottish Highland regiments throughout the, well, centuries. And in fact, even up till the World War I, which the Scottish divisions were still known to have worn. Which you gotta admit, Scottish Highlanders would not get rid of their tartan kilt. They stated it was a view of their heritage, which you gotta admit, even the divisions at the time would not go against it. So, but the only time you would ever hear Scottish bagpipes being used would actually be during the time of the British Army, especially marching into battle. This can actually be seen in history when it came to a infamous defeat for the American forces. It's actually stated the Scottish army would have marched headlong deep into the battlefield, especially with the smoke-filled areas. So it was kind of horrifying to hear that bagpipe being heard, and as well, it would be such a loud racket. Now, it's actually stated that some Scottish divisionaries were actually seen at the Battle of Bunker Hill. I don't know if that's true or not. However, it is stated, though, that many Scottish commanders would actually take part in the said American Revolution on the British side. However, many of those Scots that actually tried to survive the war, especially many of those who actually survived the Battle of Culloden, like Alex MacGregor did, they would actually keep fighting against the English, especially if we take a look in, well, the American Revolution. However, they would not actually be part of major divisions. They would be kind of what you might call regimental colonialist, well, guerrilla fighters. And in fact, they would actually commit to gruesome guerrilla warfare against the British Army. The British Army nicknamed these the Highland Devils, or in this case, the Colonial Devils. But I think the Highland Devil would actually incredibly stick a lot more, in which they actually sent other Scots to try and defeat them. It did not go so well. In fact, the Scottish Highlanders would actually defeat their own fellow Highlanders, and they even many times over, the colonists or Scottish colonists would actually call the, well, other clans of the system, or in this case, they would kind of call them the Loyalist Brigade, or in this case, the Turncoat Brigade, since they kind of, quickly turned from Jacobite to Loyalist incredibly quickly. But you gotta admit, I would not be happy with my fellow Scotsmen if they incredibly turned to the side of the English, especially rather quickly soon after, massacre after Culloden. And in fact, this could easily be seen in history with many clansmen. And in fact, even none other than John Paul Jones would even state himself that he was made an Englishman by the point of a sword, which to this day you do not call a Scotsman an Englishman or a Brit, otherwise that is just bound to get yourself kicked in the ass or worse. So if any of y'all go to Scotland, do not piss them off. Now, I do have to put this out here though, many of the Scottish clans, or in this case many of the Scotsmen that did join the British Army, were actually mainly not exactly from the Scottish, the great Scottish territories. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, it's kind of obvious. If there is, say, a major Scottish town, like anywhere from the Scottish Lowlands to the Scottish Midlands, such as Stirling or Edinburgh or such and such, or Galway or whatever, they would, or even Glasgow, I had to put this, they would actually state to have actually joined the British Army in order to get a better life for themselves, or sometimes the British Navy. In fact, most of the time, the entirety of the British Navy was considered of, Scots rather than in full-blooded Englishmen. The same can also be said about the Welsh, who did actually fight for the English a lot, especially in the regular type army. So, pretty much most of the entirety of the British Army was either made out of Scots or Welshmen. So, most of the time, it's kind of hilarious how many people don't realize this. But we do have to understand is that many of the Scottish soldiers that actually did fight for the English would have actually been from major cities, not from, say, the Scottish territorial regions. Meaning, if you lived, say, in Scotland alone, like if you lived in this area of Scotland, and not in, say, a major city at the time, then it would look, pretty much a lot different. In other words, those people in the Scottish Highlands especially, they would actually hate the English because of the fact of the major taxes that are destroying their livelihood. And many of them would flee to the United States. But in such, they would actually try again to have their own rebellion. In fact, there was actually one story that went by of a Scottish Highland division, or in northern South Carolina, that actually participated in the war, in which were highly made up of, Scottish soldiers, rather than anything of English. And in fact, it's actually stated that they hated the Protestants. In fact, this was a major Catholic zone, and they really did not like English. So, it does not end well for the English in some parts of the United States, or during the colonies. However, during that time in history, especially late in the war, it actually is stated that many of those colonialists were actually given a chance to better their chances. But many of the Scots hated the English still. And in fact, many of those who were colonists here in the New World would actually hate the English so much that they would fight against them, especially rather hard and quickly. Now, one thing we do have to understand, though, is that when the British actually did try to negotiate with the Scots and make a better deal for them, it still did not end well. So, but pretty much the majority of the Highlands or Lowlands, or whatever you want to put it, did fight in different sides of the war. And in fact, the Highlanders and Islanders of Scotland actually did fight for the United States, or colonists, because they fled towards the Americas in order to find a better life. Seeing as though their life in, Britain was, or Scotland at the time, it was kind of not going so well. And in fact, many Scots were, being treated as second-class citizens in their own clan, or by other clansmen, who of which had now full governorship over them, even though they did not feel like it. And as well, what's made it worse is that it kind of would be a little horrifying for the Scottish army if they were to face off against the English on their home turf again. But the thing is, though, it was when John Paul Jones would actually attack the English Navy that many Scots in the Highlands would actually rebel. These would be known as the Last Rebellion, However, they would actually commit to guerrilla warfare, or in this case, also join John Paul's army in a form of naval warfare, especially those of the Islanders. The Islanders, such as one of the most famous, would actually be the MacLeods, who actually did bring up a massive navy. Now, it is stated, though, that some of these clans would still be loyal to Great Britain, but it did not end so well for them, especially with John Paul Jones, who actually was stated to have committed a massive amount of naval warfare on the coasts of those who were loyalists to the English, especially those he hated the most. But we do have to put this out here, that the fact that the Scottish Highland divisions, especially in their war, it was, well, especially during the American Revolution, would have actually gone especially incredibly through a gruesome form of warfare. It's actually stated that the Highland regiments would have actually done a Jacobite charge, or in this case a Highland charge, while firing their Brown Bess muskets at their said opponents. Now, I don't know how I should put this out to any of y'all, but it's kind of horrifying enough to see a Highland charge, but it's another thing to see a Highland charge with the fact that as soon as they fire their musket in point-blank range, they then draw out a secondary sword, which this was a sidearm, especially if they lost their musket, which the British regular army was taught to do this. But the thing is, what the Scots did, they drew out the sword, which this was a modified Scottish broadsword, which is like this. However, it would have been shortened, somewhat like a cutlass, which a cutlass is technically a Scottish-style naval sword. And in such, it would be somewhat like this, but slightly smaller, and in such, they would have actually gone incredibly horrifyingly, used the musket almost like a shield or a stick-like weapon. While drawing the sword, they would use one arm to cut, and the other to stab and even butt the person with the weapon. So, these guys were gruesome killers. In fact, it's actually stated that one famous general in history of the British Army, who of which went by the name of General Gage, actually stated that he saw the Highland Regiment fight as though they were creatures of the death, and in such, they fought like devils upon the man of the colonist forces. I would rather not send such men in such gruesome warfare, for they might slaughter every man to the slaughter. So, that's actually saying something. This meant that the Highland Regiment would have fought like demons on the battlefield, and probably slaughtered anyone that they came across, especially due to the fact they kind of fought like demons. So, General Gage gave a good description on what these guys fought like. And in fact, these guys were incredibly dangerous. In fact, it's even stated that in one battle alone, on a area somewhere in New York, a Scottish Highlander of the Scottish Regiment, or the 13th Regiment as it was known, which I know not a good number, however it was nicknamed the 13th by the British government because these guys gave bad luck through their opponents, not themselves. However, the 13th Regiment disbanded, I think, after the War of 1812, especially after the Battle of New Orleans, of which did not end well for them, especially. But it is stated, though, sometime in New York City or somewhere in New York, they did face off a massive group of American colonial regulars, who of which were firing at them from a fortified position. And guess what? The 13th Division charged up this elongated bombardment of hill, meaning this area was filled with fortifications, and the, well, Minutemen, or in this case, regulars, the American Regular Division, were firing upon them with musket after musket shot, 3 rounds a minute, trying to kill them. But it is stated that one lone Highlander threw volley after volley of grenade into the said fortifications or areas, and as such blew up, they said, a massive amount of American, colonial troops. However, they didn't blow up, but you get my point, that he lobbied grenades into their area. So that's kind of horrifying due to the fact this guy's charging at you with probably a bunch of grenades. And in fact, it's actually stated that Grenadiers, as they were known as, were a lone division of, well, hand grenados or hand throwers who threw grenades, which the word grenade is not English. It's actually Scott Gaelic, or Scot-Irish. And it's actually what they would have actually been called, Grenadier, or Grenadier, as it was also known as the traditional type. And that's where we get our name from. However, it did not evolve. It pretty much evolved into Granado or such, which Granado is a Spanish term, I think. But the English called them bombs or bombardiers. But Scots or Irish, Scot-Irishmen, they would have called them grenadiers or, well, grenadiers, since these guys were called that from the Scot Gaelic term. So technically, we got the word grenade from Scot Gaelic. So you gotta admit that's kind of cool. But one thing we do have to understand is that these guys were horrifying to the brim in historical warfare. It's actually stated that the Scottish divisions would not break unless they ran out of ammunition. So they would have fought to the last man. And in fact, it's actually stated that one Scottish division, especially in the American Revolution, under the control of British General Gage, actually ordered them to hold the line until every man has fallen. And in such, they did as they were told. They held the line firm and defeated a colonial force that was actually routing the British. However, because of the Scottish force, it's actually stated that the American forces withdrew, believing it was a bigger force than they were going up against. So that's kind of horrifying in the fact that we actually understand that the Scots fought like devils, and if you gotta admit, I really would not want to face off against a Scotsman that's probably charging at me and firing his musket at me. So that's saying something. However, in the American Revolution, as I stated, for the American colonists, with those that were fighting, with many of the Scots that were fighting with them, they were actually mostly, well, militiamen, or in this case, guerrilla warfare fighters. And in such, they committed to such guerrilla warfare on the English in such rapid amount of, well, form, that it's actually stated that one British colonel was actually shot in through his pubic region, which was kind of hilariously messed up. It stated that the Scottish soldier had pointed a double-barrel rifle. This is a rifle, not a shotgun. I hear maybe you already don't know the difference. Well, there's a huge difference. It stated that he pointed the gun directly at the horse, wanting to shoot the horse, but not the colonel. Problem is, the bullet accidentally went through the horse and into the colonel's groin. It ended up killing the colonel in the process. The Scottish soldiers were actually what you might call famous for doing a type of Highland style guerrilla warfare, especially in the middle of fog. In foggy terrain, especially near the Appalachian Mountains, it's actually stated that one Native American group had actually named these Highland soldiers the plaidcoats, or in this case, the plaidmen, since they actually hid such incredibly well in the area. So that's actually saying something. The Scottish would have actually worn their Scottish kilts and tartans, especially in the area, to conceal themselves. So many Native American tribes actually found them very honorable, and they even saw them fight to the last man in order to win a battle. So many of the Native American tribes actually saluted them and honored them as fellow Native warriors. In fact, it's actually stated that one Native Highlander had actually, during the American Revolution, fought 1 against 10, which these were British soldiers who, or collaborators with the British Army, in which these Native American tribes were pretty much, well, trying to win against the Americans in order to keep them out. Thing is, though, this Scottish Highlander, one lone Scottish Highlander, fought against at least 10 Native American warriors when he was separated from his group. And in such, he had actually managed to kill at least 9 of them. And, as well, only wounded 1 of them. The Native American actually informed the rest of his tribe of how bravely this warrior fought to the last man in order to survive. And he was deeply honored to fought against this man. It is later stated that this man's name was Huxlan Kamach, or in this case it was, well, this is the Native American term they called it. However, I guess they were trying to translate the original Scottish name for him into Native American, so that might make sense, but we have no other information on what his real name might have been. For all we know, it could have been something entirely different. However, it's stated that this meant the brave warrior, or the bear warrior, as he fought like a bear that was cornered. So, even the Scottish Highlanders that fought for the American colonists were gruesome. So, that's saying something. Now, I hear many people already asking, but Templar, why didn't the Scottish army, or the Scottish soldiers that fought for the, well, colonialist forces, why didn't they fight in massive formations like with the rest of the colonial army? Well, one major reason was they did not want another Culloden. In fact, many Scots had stated that they were not allowed to repeat the past. And such, you gotta imagine, many of those who were the survivors of Culloden would want to flee from that battle entirely, well, want to survive. But the problem is, most people don't realize, is the fact that, well, not that many survived. In fact, many of those Scots that did actually fight for the colonies were pretty much their sons or their grandsons that fought against them. So you can see my point. But many times over, there actually was only a few divisions in the British Army of the Scottish military, or Scottish division in the British Army, that actually fought as guerrilla warfare fighters. Problem is, they actually did not believe in fighting like this, and as such, they were only actually seen primarily in somewhere near the Appalachian Mountains, the same as most Scottish soldiers that fought for the colonies. Sadly, though, we don't get that much information about them, seeing as though they are kind of viewed as a backdrop figure. In other words, they're not that widely known. But however, we do know is that most of the time, these guys were probably the most horrifying guys on the battlefield for one major reason. Now, the first time I ever heard of Scottish soldiers in the American Revolution would actually be from a show called Liberty's Kids, and I only see them once in the entire thing. I'll leave an episode where you can see it yourself. In fact, you can even hear the Scottish bagpipes being heard in the background, which is kind of incredibly awesome. But yeah, one thing we do have to understand, though, is that the Scottish soldiers that fought on both sides of the war would have been gruesomely effective soldiers on the battlefield. So just imagine how horrifying these guys were, especially if you were to face off against them up and close in person. Does anybody want that? I sure as hell don't. That's horrifying. But yeah, if any of y'all have any ideas for the American Revolution, please let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to get right to them. As well, y'all, if y'all want me to talk about a famous division in the American Revolution, please let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to talk about it also. And as well, if any of y'all have any other ideas related to Scotland, please let me know also in the comments below. Also, like and subscribe, and hit the click that bell button for notifications when the next video comes up. But as well, y'all, also check us out on Facebook so we know which next video we're going to be talking about soon. But yes, also subscribe to the channel to make the channel grow. And in fact, most of y'all that do watch this are not exactly subscribed, so please help the channel grow. Anyways, guys, it's been Templar. Have a great day.